Hello, everyone. This is Dominic. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we are honored to have Michael Colt, who will be sharing with us why you should treat your platform as a product. So before we start, we have a little housekeeping rules. This webinar will be pre-recorded. So we will share the link with you after this webinar. And then if you have any question in between the webinar, you can drop it at the Q&A box. To make this webinar more interactive, we will also have a several polling in between these webinars. We are looking forward for your participation. So without further ado, I'll pass the time to Michael. Over to you, Michael.
Well, hello. Well, thanks for attending here or watching this wherever you're in, whatever time you may be in. So, what I wanted to go over today is I think a concept that has been around for quite some time as people have been thinking about how they support running their applications and building the applications their organization uses, especially as cloud technologies and things have come around in the past like 5 or so years. But I think there's a renewed interest in this topic because of the role that, as I'll get into, that Kubernetes is playing in kind of defining the platform that organizations are using to run their own applications. And the context here is what I've mentioned running their own applications several times. And what I spend a lot of time studying and what we here at VMware Tanzu spend a lot of our time supporting is the stack that organizations use to build, run, and manage their own software, whether that's things like online banking software, retail software that governments use, to run their services, whatever it is that if you have your own software that your organization uses that's custom to what you're doing, that you're evolving, that's like the ultimate goal of a lot of the work that we do, the stack that we're providing and helping people out with across whatever infrastructure or clouds they may be doing. But I'm not going to speak too much about that technology. More of what it is the process, the mentality, maybe even if you like the word, a little bit of the culture, but the way that people operate that stack, that as we say, platform that we have. Because just getting the technology in place is important and is critical and can even be difficult to figure out and run ongoing, but also using it in the right way, having the process and the mindset, the way that you interact with, as we'll find out, the customers of this platform is equally important. I like to think of it as to use a phrase from one of my favorite podcasters, a thought technology. So it's a new sort of thing to install in addition to that stack. And that's what I want to go over, this idea of platform as a product, or as some people call it nowadays, platform engineering. So as I mentioned, I think the vitalness, if that's a word, but the importance of this at the moment is really coming about because because Kubernetes is this extremely pervasive desire that people have. I've been working in the cloud area for, I don't know, maybe 10 or more years now. And there have been several iterations of what type of infrastructure we want, how we want to make that infrastructure reusable, make it the most efficient to use. And I think really in the past only couple of years, what's won out is using Kubernetes as a way to represent a standardized, shared, sort of well-defined way of interacting with and managing the infrastructure that you have. So instead of, 3, 5, 10 different ways of managing and thinking about infrastructure, packaging things up for it, Kubernetes has come in and really standardized that in the best of all possible ways, with the goal of making it the most efficient way to use infrastructure and kind of making it so that it's easier to build things on top of infrastructure. Now, there's if you've been paying attention to this space, there's a bit of it's getting a little bit better as the years go by, but there's a bit of what I think of as a paradox around Kubernetes, where there is this extreme desire for people to use it. Putting this in air quotes, right? Like everybody wants to use Kubernetes as an investigating it, and that's certainly what I see and what we see at VMware when we talk with people, and probably what you're experiencing as well. But even though there's a lot of great benefits to it, and people are highly desirous to use it, there's always frequently a lot of complaints about its complexity, about the inability to find the skills for people who can use it, the difficulty of integrating with other things, and as it happens, as you can see in this chart here, this is from our most recent State of Kubernetes survey, the third year. So you can see that how the difficulties people have with Kubernetes have been shifting, most of them for the good, right? You can see them going down as you look right across the screen. So people are getting better at the skills. It's easier to set it up with the infrastructure that you have, which is great, right? So you can see that we're improving. And I think the number one thing that people struggle with now are the security needs of it. And I think the good news here is that this is what happens with any technology as it becomes more pervasively used, as more and more people use it, right? You get out of the initial usage of it, the kind of experimental usage, then the initial teams that are using it in production, and it becomes more mainstream. And so, of course, you have more and more concerns about security, and you want to apply more policy to it. So it's something that you end up working on. But you can see over the years, there's been this difficulty of people using it. Again, it's getting better. But you also see the paradox part of it is that while people have found it difficult over the years, like, as I mentioned, everyone is interested in using it, right? Like you can see across geographies from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation annual survey, which is another great survey for kind of figuring out the state of what's going on in Kubernetes and the benefits that people have. But you can see that people are either running things in production already or it's vital to what their plans are going forward, right? So it really has, for lack of a better phrase, kind of won out for what people want to do. And so, I'm curious for the listeners here, the people watching this, like, let's take a little moment and, you can answer in the polling question that we have what kind of the usage that you have is, right? And I think it's interesting. The kind of the way to measure usage nowadays is by how many clusters you're supporting. So if we can put that poll up now, and as you answer those poll questions, once we've gotten around to answering them, I'll show you what results we had in our last State of Kubernetes survey, so you can compare what is going on there. So let's see.
As you can see, there's a poll questions, which asks about how many Kubernetes cluster does your organization run? A is 5 or less, B is 6 to 10, C is 11 to 25, and D is 26 to 50, and E is more than 50.
Those are some interesting results so far.
It's
all results are interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting to see most of them have less than 5.
Right. And that would suggest, people are, as I was saying, there's broader interest in things, and in more and more people are interested in doing it. So they're kind of experimenting. Maybe they're trying it out, applying it in a good way, like doing things in a small way to experiment with it. Well, shall we?
Yeah, so it is good to start out in a small scale.
Exactly. And that's in fact, just to give you a little bit of a preview, one of the things at the end that I'll get to is the importance of starting small in the first year and kind of expanding out as you go out.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So over to you, Michael.
All right. Well, let's go on. Let me show you what has happened over the years in our State of Kubernetes survey. And again, I think it's great. The primary way I use surveys, having been an industry analyst, is just to see what's going on out there. But I think if you're someone who's actually running IT and running these things, surveys are great to kind of compare yourself to what's going on out there. And as we were kind of alluding to, as Dominique and I were alluding to, it's also great to see if you're progressing at a reasonable rate, if you're ahead or you're behind or what you're doing. And you can see that over the years, people have been expanding out what they've been doing. And actually, there's a lot of people, as the survey respondents that we have really kind of moved beyond those first 5 there, right? Now, to be fair, the other thing with surveys to pay attention to is that, like, there is a bias. If you see a Kubernetes survey out there probably is a bias that you're doing something with it already, right? Especially when you look at like the CNCF surveys, I keep that in mind. But anyways, here you can kind of compare where you are with where people in this survey globally have been doing things. So, if you want to dive into that more, you can't click on the slides now, but it's easy enough to go look that up and see how else people are doing. Well, so as people are, again, this is the 3 years of it. As people are getting Kubernetes installed, you can see that they're achieving all sorts of benefits. What you would imagine, right? Like, as I highlighted earlier, improved resource utilization is kind of a boring way to phrase it, but basically it just means that they're running their IT more efficiently, right? They're getting more with the same amount, which is great. I mean, that's kind of what you want from infrastructure. You also want it to work, right? To have good scalability and performancy, to lower latency, and to be secure, have all those characteristics that you want, which you can see people having. But again, thinking back to the point is to support running the applications that your organization needs to operate. And that's where things have been shifting over the years, kind of in a troubling way. And you can see that the application related things like shortening your development cycle, right? As I'll get into, I think it's not always the case, but I think it's, so to speak, the default case that the faster you can get software out, the better that software can be, because you can start to explore and really design that software based on what users are doing with it. So shortening release cycles, I always think of as kind of the default way of judging how well you're doing at software. And you can see that that's, I don't know if it's dramatic. Well, I don't know, it kind of is, but you can see that has kind of been disturbingly going up over the years, right? As something that people are benefiting as a problem. Like it's reducing in its beneficiariness in the way that you read this chart. And so this is where I'm interested in figuring out what's going on with people who are running Kubernetes. Again, not so much the technology, but the way that people are running it. And I think the reason that people are starting to encounter this is that they're discovering that even if you do Kubernetes in the best possible way, you get it up and running, you've tried out and decided to run the best option for Kubernetes, the Tanzu stack, the Tanzu Kubernetes for operators and operations. Obviously, I think that's the best because it's the one that we do. But what you encounter is that Kubernetes really, what it does is when it comes to developers, it just gives you a blinking cursor, right? It doesn't necessarily have all the tools, all the things that developers need to then start doing applications. And in fact, without, as I'll get into, taking a platform as a product mentality and the work that comes with that, developers are left to figure out how to package things up for Kubernetes, how to deploy it, how to architect their applications, to bring all the services and middleware. They're really left to do everything that developers needed before you were using Kubernetes to get things up and running for your infrastructure. And I think that's what people are encountering as they get Kubernetes in place, and why developers are slowing down their release cycles as Kubernetes is more and more pervasively used. So I want to get to how this idea of platform as a product or platform engineering helps out with that. And to do that, I want to go over briefly, just to go way up the stack, so to speak, to the application layer, and go over what the point of it is, right? Like I keep talking about applications organizations use to run their application. And so that is the goal, in my mind, for what I care about, of doing anything with Kubernetes, is to support that application development cycle. And let me tell you what the state of the art, what the best practices for that are, by going over a story from one of our customers from a couple years ago in the food services industry. So that means they not only deliver food to restaurants and large cafeterias, but also, if you want, they can run the kitchens for your large, you have those large cafeterias and restaurants at, business buildings or universities or wherever you might have large restaurants. And what this team wanted to do is, the business goals they had was to focus on, kind of like with Kubernetes, optimizing or reducing the costs, making more productive and performant those kitchens as the chefs in there were putting together the meals and serving it to people. So they wanted to make sure they were doing it in the most efficient way possible, and also improve the customer experience, as we would say in software. So the quality and the consistency of the food, right? Making sure it was good food, presumably healthy, if that's what people were targeting. And the way that they wanted to do this originally is they had been doing this all through paper menus. I like to imagine they had those 3-ring binders or, 6-ring binders, depending on what kind of notebooks that you have. And they would ship out the recipes, and you would have the books. And this is kind of an error-prone way of doing things, right? You've got to update the recipes. They get covered in food. Anyways, like, using paper is not always the best way of doing things, especially if you want to update it frequently, kind of like software. And so originally the team there, the business had the idea that we should, of course, digitize the recipes, put them on tablets, and that will solve the issues that we have. So in a traditional way of doing software of applications, the developers would have, someone would have specified those requirements, maybe even made some wireframes. The developers would have worked on it. And depending on how fast they would operate, 6 to 8 to 12 months later, kind of shipped this application. And the infrastructure people would have built out what was needed ahead of time. And, you would do it in a, as people say, waterfall approach. But instead, this organization was, instead of taking that project mentality, they took a product mentality. And what happened is the development team, and, I'm not going to go into the details of this so much, but they followed a product mentality where the development team, they actually got up early in the morning and for about a week studied what the chefs were doing and the staff in the kitchen to identify what the problems were that could help them achieve those goals of efficiency and better customer service, right? So this team had ownership to discover that. And they discovered that what really would be a more valuable way of doing it would be to automate the way that the kitchen staff was measuring the temperature of raw ingredients, like raw chicken, raw mayonnaise, things like that. Because, of course, you don't want those things to spoil. That will cause the worst customer experience, food poisoning, which I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I have. But it's not a good user experience of the interface of software, of food, I mean. And also, it would free up a lot of their time and digitize that process, which would make the governance of the kitchen, the health inspectors, better. So anyhow, as you can imagine with a story like this, if I told you that they did that and it didn't work out, I wouldn't be making much of a point. But they actually changed the remit of what they were doing and studied putting that in place. And they found out that it helped them achieve those business outcomes a lot better. And eventually they went to digitizing the recipe books and things like that. But the reason that the development team, the product team, was able to do that is they had the infrastructure underneath them, a platform that supported them doing this. They didn't have to spend a lot of time focusing on standing up that infrastructure, managing it, figuring out how to package things up and wire it together to work in the platform they were using. And instead, that was all taken care of for them. And they could just focus on going through very frequent release cycles. I don't remember if it was weekly or twice a week. And the developers could spend all their time studying that product and making it better. So that's the end goal that something like Platform as a Product has, right? How can you get, and I say developers, but there's a whole team of different people who end up working in addition to developers on software like this. How can you, as the infrastructure, the operations people, support developers doing that? And I think that's where this idea of Platform as a Product comes into play and has a lot to offer so that your organization can start measuring the mayonnaise more efficiently, as it were. So it starts with, so if your goal is to support those developers, as I'll get into, as you think about those developers as the customers that your infrastructure, your platform is supporting, thinking about how those developers went through studying the chefs in the kitchen, their customers, it's good to start thinking about, so what are we supporting for our customers? What do they need? What is their core problem? And this is a highly simplified, like little just sketch that I did about what the customers, what the developers, what they need, what their process is. Now, what the life cycle of an application, what developers do, it gets much more complicated. And if you've heard phrases like inner and outer loop, you can even break this out into various tasks as kind of an idea goes to development all the way to running in production. But, you can kind of, just for the purposes of this, you can make it kind of simple, right? Someone has an idea for a feature to put, right? Like, well, we would like to, let's put some features in place that help us automate measuring the mayonnaise temperature. You kind of very quickly kind of create what people would call a backlog nowadays. You kind of just quickly sketch out what that idea is and how it might look. You have to write the code to get it there. Nowadays, if you do things in a Kubernetes or a container-based way, you got to put it into a container. You do your integration and you're deploying, and eventually you deploy it to production. Now, there's actually a lot more things that go into it, but this becomes, when you're an infrastructure person shifting over to running platforms, this is kind of like the core workflow that you're helping enable. And I like to put this up here because it's kind of different than the traditional IT service management way of thinking about things, where what you're enabling is a service, right? You're enabling availability and latency and performance. You're almost like delivering performance characteristics, rather than kind of like this flow of capabilities that developers need. Now, of course, you also need to deliver performance and things like this and that. But thinking about this as part of your deliveries is almost your primary thing, is what kind of distinguishes just raw infrastructure from a platform. So now, if you think through supporting what developers are doing, there's a whole new set of things that comes into play that developers need, the products that you as the platform engineers, the infrastructure people are providing, right? This is an example of the product that you're building for developers, again, to satisfy the needs that they have, not just provide those services. And there are many other diagrams of what that platform looks like. We've got some great white papers if you want to see how analysts kind of think through this. But this is the platform that we put together in the VMware Tanzu land, right? Sort of the Kubernetes layer underneath that runs on whatever type of infrastructure you need. And then really, the great platform that we have, there's two things that we offer. We have the Tanzu application platform that I'll kind of go through as a representation of what services are in there. But we also have the Tanzu application service, which is a full-blown platform as a service that is really integrated together and kind of has a kind of accelerates the use of doing things by having a lot of, as we would say, opinions or default ways of doing things. But if you want to layer on and build your own platform on top of Kubernetes, now you can use the Tanzu application platform for that. There's a lot of customized modules. But as you look through that, you can see that it's not only about getting that blinking cursor up and running and making sure it's secure and compliant, but there's a lot of things that developers use directly, as you can see with the developer tools in there, right? The ability to not only monitor, but also start to debug their applications in production in clusters. Integrated in middleware and services, especially in the Spring, in the Java Spring and the .NET world. But all of those things integrated in a self-service way into the platform. Again, thinking about what do the developers need to go through that service. And that's what's in that platform, right? And you can check out our thinking and what we do there. But this is, again, a very pervasive idea in the industry of what a platform is and how you provide it with people. And as I'll get into, it's layering that platform on top, like the Tanzu application platform or the Tanzu application service, that gives you that platform and moves you beyond that blinking cursor. So that's kind of a technology look there. And before we move on to what the practices look like, what it looks like to run a platform as a product service, we have another poll question just to ask, who is managing and running Kubernetes in your environment? Because if we can get that poll up, because that's almost where we are now. Is it'll be interesting to see what I'll tell you. I'll compare when we get the results. Compare it to what people are doing that I see.
So you will now see in the polling who manage Kubernetes in your organization. Is that your developers, operations, or both of them? Or we have Kubernetes, but we don't know, or we don't have Kubernetes?
That's the third one's always my favorite answer, because I feel like that represents a lot of the reality in my life. Is I know something exists and we're doing it, but I'm not really sure what the details are. Having 3 kids and a wife and people coming and going, I always know something's happening, but I'm never sure of what the details are.
So what's happening among our audiences? We see of around 50% operations, and then 50% saying that we don't have Kubernetes.
Yeah, so those are, It's as it goes on, it's coming out about even, right? Where you could almost divide it into thirds between developers, operators, and we don't have Kubernetes. I mean, it's shifting about there. But I think just kind of going over the results, I think that is pretty common to what I see, right? Is you've got a significant amount of people who are exploring what to do about it, as I was mentioning earlier, and you've got developers who have been running and figuring it out on their own. And I think now and in the next few years, you'll see operations people kind of pulling in and being in charge of running Kubernetes. Because really, as you can imagine, developers may like initially doing it, but it's not something that they want to focus much of their time on. Or, as we'll find out, if you find those developers who do want to focus a lot on Kubernetes, they might be a good candidate for getting into your platform team there. So I'm going to move on to the next section. And so in this section, it was a fun excuse to use some clip art, our official clip art, where it vaguely looks like me. No one called me to do modeling for this, but I guess it happened anyways. It's very thrilling there. And there's also one of those Bluetooth headsets on the other person there, which made me very fondly reminisce those days of the 2000s, where I went through all sorts of little Bluetooth headsets before what we have nowadays. Anyhow, sorry, I'm getting distracted. What I want to go over now is, I think, the most important part of figuring out what your Kubernetes strategy is, and therefore what your platform strategy is. And that is looking at how you build out, how you set up the roles and responsibilities, and what the tasks are that your platform team does, right? And this is, I think, I'm a believer that not only is process and people difficult, but also the technology. Both of those things are actually difficult to get right, but you need to do both of them. And I think thinking about the process and the people side of things is a little bit more neglected than the technology part, which I guess is what kind of makes it difficult. Things you forget about that are required often become the difficult thing. So I'm going to go over what I see people doing there to be successful with their platform strategy. So the first thing, and this is why I wanted to have the polling in place there, is I think it's very important to realize that having your developers, and to be clear, your application developers, because we get into this distinction of application and platform developers pretty quickly here, as you'll find out. But it's important as an organization at a pretty high level, because you want to set this as a standard, right? That you really want to avoid having application developers do a lot of your Kubernetes management, right? And that is because as people who have been using Kubernetes, and as you can kind of see in the surveys, what you'll find is that managing and setting up and doing the ongoing work to keep your Kubernetes platform useful, or your platform, whatever it may be, is a lot of work, right? And it does require a set of skills that are kind of distinct from application development skills, right? There's a lot of overlap, but there also are a lot of differences with that. And what I've seen over the years is that when you rely on your developers, and in some cases, to phrase it in a nuanced way, you let your developers be the ones who start planning out and managing your Kubernetes platform, it really does take a lot of time away from what their real work is, which is, thinking back to that mayonnaise example, studying what users of the software are doing, coming up with theories of how to solve those problems best with features, and working on the actual application code, moving pixels on the screen, if you will, changing the UI around and changing the features behind it to run the business differently. And it not only detracts from that work, but one of the key things of a platform as a product strategy is spending a lot of time studying what those developers need ongoing and adding new features and modifying the features that you have. And this is the product part, that you are always thinking you're product managing it and changing and updating the platform. And I think when you don't do that, this is what causes platforms to stall out and not be liked for developers, and causes them to go look at other things, when you just sort of deliver a platform and its feature set stays the same. And instead, you really do need to renew it and add new features to it so that it becomes competitive to other options that are out there. So anyways, doing all of that is a full-time job for a team of people. And you need to establish a different team, your platform team, to do that instead of your application team, who will just be overrun with those responsibilities. Now, the next thing is that I've noticed that it's really important to avoid building your own platform from the ground up, right? So a lot of what's in the Kubernetes world and just the container world is open source. So it's tempting to go out and build all of your own things. And if you go back 5-6 years, that was a little bit of the only option with Kubernetes, or one of the primary options. So you do have stories of people doing that. But nowadays, 5 or 6 years later, if you've seen the cloud native computing foundation like landscape, there are all sorts of options that are in pretty good states of maturity of at least components that you can have to build this platform, right? You don't have to start from nothing and kind of build up that beyond that blinking cursor. Now, there's also, as I mentioned earlier, there's all sorts of distributions and offerings like we have that will run on whatever cloud you have. It's, you can check out what we have there and what other people have. But I would start with the assumption that let's assume that we're going to not build our own platform, and let's work back from there. Let's find out the things that we need to customize, and let's start with a platform with all the components, a pre-built one, and let's work backwards. And if we need to customize something, like, if you're using a situation like the Tanzu application platform, you can go in there and customize the various components that you want. But nowadays, I think it's good to start with everything and work back from there rather than building up to a platform. Because over the years, I've seen lots of people build their own platform, and they'll spend like a year or so and many staff hours, and they'll end up with just that blinking cursor, with something that is not really ready to hand over to developers. And then they often come back to starting off with a fuller platform. So here's several options listed here that you can start with, but I would have that be part of what you're doing from the beginning. Kind of figure out the platforms that are out there across public clouds or private clouds, all sorts of things that you can check in on. So I want to draw this out specifically, but I've mentioned this several times, that there's a shift in mentality that your platform team goes in from traditional operations thinking, and that is to call it out again, right? And I used to work on this kind of software when I was a developer. Some time ago. I worked on a lot of software that supported, systems management and monitoring, supporting what operations people did to run the infrastructure and make sure it was doing well in production. And a lot of that software was, again, done around this mentality of delivering a service, right? Delivering to SLAs, which was great at the time, right? It worked for when you have longer release cycles, you're delivering on a 12-month cycle, right? The job of operations becomes just running that thing, which is an extremely important aspect of the software that you have. But to pull together a lot of things that I've been saying, nowadays, development teams are, they really, and there's always exceptions, but they run best when they can go on, I would say, a weekly cycle, maybe every 2 weeks. They narrow down what they do each release cycle to something that they can deliver in a weekly cycle like that. Just obviously much smaller changes than you would get in a 6-month or a 12-week cycle. But they're able to go through that small batch loop where they can experiment and explore and discover what the problems are they're solving, like for the people measuring mayonnaise, and the best way of doing them. And so that is a product management approach to doing things. And similarly, what I see platform teams doing is they think about their platform as a product. So they follow that same cycle that the application developers are. And they actually have a product manager, probably several product managers, who are working closely, studying closely what developers do, helping the team of platform operators and platform developers come up with a new feature, right? Like, what are the best data stores that developers would need? If we need to support various compliance and security requirements that we have, how can we make it easiest for developers to comply with those security needs, right? How can we put, as we would say, a secure software supply chain in place and make doing the right thing the easier thing for developers? And that role is often filled, or can often be filled, by an enterprise architect, right? If you think about what a traditional enterprise architect does, or even an infrastructure architect, they are hopefully well situated to fill that role, and of the product manager. But start thinking about if you're not familiar with the idea of product management, it's a good thing to kind of start learning about. We've got some great literature, some great things to look over. There's also a great book called Effective Product Management, and The Product Trap, I think, is the full title of it. That's kind of good to read over. But it's a mentality that seems simple at first, and it is simple once you know the steps of it. But start thinking about how you're product managing your platform, not just delivering a set of services that you have. So that's the second thing. The third thing to start thinking about as you're putting your strategy together. And then as we alluded to in the at the beginning, as Dominique and I were talking about, the next thing to do is, there's two things here. One is to start small, right? So just start with a few applications that your platform is supporting, right? So when you build out your initial platform, I mean, the first critical thing that you'll find out when you start doing things in a product management way is you really do need at least one customer when you're building your product at first. When you're building out your platform, you'll need to find at least one application that you're supporting, at least one team of developers. Because if you're building without a customer in mind, you'll just build theoretically what you think is useful. So find, let's say, 1 to 2 teams that you'll be supporting, 1 to 2 applications, and start working with them right away to find out what application that they need. And as you iterate through what your platform is, how you're building on top of that blinking cursor, the services that you have to support it, you'll be able to work closely with that team and you'll build something that works for them. Now, what this means is that you start small, right? You start with 1 team for the first 3 months, maybe 2 teams, then expand out to 4 teams, to 6 teams. And, this isn't always the best thing to hear either, that my sales friends necessarily want to get across, or if you have big ambitions. But I would say in the first year of doing this, it's probably good to scale back whatever ambitions that you have so that you manage the risk of rolling things out, right? So if you're thinking of converting everything over in your portfolio to run on this platform, or maybe even 50% of what you have, it's good to put a lot of thinking into that, because chances are, like most every large organization I talked with, you're going to need to start small and learn how things are going and kind of scale up slowly in that first 6 months, that first 12 months, as you learn and build out what the platform is. I mean, but the good news is you're managing the risk of failure because you're actively learning what's going on there. And eventually, as you can see in these charts and what people have done over time, you can scale to the rest of the organization, but it's a great way to manage that risk. And it will actually help you control the costs and the risk. And there's another way by taking people from those initial teams and seeding them to other teams, building up internal knowledge that you can scale that change in a large organization successfully. So there's just a couple more things that I'm going to go over before we leave some time for questions at the end. And again, these things are, this is a lot of what I have studied over the years, how when large organizations are improving the way that they do their software. And you can see that a lot of it is kind of going through that cycle of learning and discovering and finding out what your customers, the developers, need. And just like with the mayonnaise measures, figuring out the best approach to solving their problem. And to that end, we just recently published a methodology that we've been using in Tanzu Labs with customers as a way of almost bootstrapping, helping developers out, right? So, if you remember, that platform above the blinking cursor of Kubernetes is not only the support for packaging and running things, but also the tools that developers need to go through that cycle of, from concept to code, right? And one of the great ways early on and ongoing to find out how you can help them, how the platform team and the platform tools team can help them, is really to ask them what they're struggling with. And, if you're not familiar with what developers know, it can be kind of a challenge to come up with those questions. But we've been using a methodology as part of how we discover technical debt, kind of legacy stuff needed, of finding what we call developer toil. And it's actually really easy to do this. You can start with the default template. You can just get the questions that we have and just put it in a Google Forms or an Office 365 Forms, whatever you want to use for polling. And there's a methodology that we go over in this paper to just sort of send out, you want to do it pretty frequently at first, and then maybe after that on a quarterly basis or whatever. But you ask your developers this series of questions, and it helps you really not only find things you can help them with, but from a product management perspective, you can prioritize what will be the most important problems to solve that will help speed up developers going through that cycle and improve their software. So this is a great sort of ongoing survey that you can have to kind of rate the progress of how you're helping developers out and discover things that you can assist them with. And, you know, you can download that paper in these slides here. Hopefully no one's writing down these 30 things here, but it's a really easy way to start discovering how to help people out and the features to put in place. And then, you know, as we saw in the survey way at the beginning, right? I would say one of the top concerns, often the number one concern people have is they're spreading out Kubernetes use more and more, is thinking about the security aspects of it. And thankfully, this is an area where actually, again, it's not so much that security is easy, but there are well-known ways of making Kubernetes secure, right? And there's even, and to the point of it being well-known, this paper has expired in the sense that it needs to be renewed, right? That the advice can be refreshed. But there are many, many examples of advice about how to secure Kubernetes and the requirements for securing it in more advanced kind of security planning. And this is just one example from the U.S. Army that we work with them on this whole end-to-end idea of getting better at software. There's some great stories about how the Army has been doing that if you're interested. But they, in the Department of Defense, in the States, they have a great overview. It's very brief. It's only about 30 pages of understanding what it means to secure Kubernetes and also the mindset that security people can take when it comes to securing it, and the requirements as you're sorting that out. So security is an issue, and it's not easy to solve, but it is solvable. It's something that you can definitely address when you're doing it. And then finally, the last thing before I go over just one example of an organization that's had a lot of success with the platform as a product mentality is another thing which I like to emphasize because the degree to which it's important, the amount of work that you need to do here is easy to overlook, maybe even be dismissive of. And that is thinking about the way that you are doing your internal marketing and advocacy and training, but training is just part of it. But the way that you're setting up an internal team of people to help spread the use of your platform, to educate the development teams, those product teams about using the platform, and also start to gather feedback about the platform usage and even brand the platform, come up with a name for the platform that you have. So I think about this as a whole as internal marketing for the platform. But I think also you can start to think about it. People are starting to call it platform advocacy, right? And if you think about the role of a developer advocate or evangelist, as we used to call it, that we from the vendor and the cloud world have, right? Like you have people like myself and others on the developer advocate team that I'm on, you know, they kind of go out into the world and talk about the software development tools and Kubernetes. You know, they help people understand how great new technologies are and kind of share demos and stories about it, as I'm doing now. And that same kind of advocacy, that marketing work, developer advocates they don't hate, but they prefer not to have the word marketing applied to them. But that's a lot of what they're doing, right? They're raising awareness and understanding and helping people know about how these technologies can help them. But this is something that I see over and over again in large organizations, is that they have this advocacy, this marketing function around the platform, right? They don't just put the platform up and, you know, update some pages in Confluence or whatever, or on SharePoint, whatever your intranet is, and just like expect people to come use it. And in fact, there's even a name for this anti-pattern, which is the build it and they don't come pattern, kind of based on that old movie, Field of Dreams, if you remember. And it's been shown over and over again that if you just kind of like stand up a platform and you expect people to come use it, it's very difficult to succeed at that. So instead, what I've seen is that very early on, these platform people, you have one full-time dedicated person who's a platform advocate. And their job is to think about how do we go out, whether that's literally you go out and visit people, you know, at the various sites that you have clusters of developers at, or you do it online. But they're in charge of really documenting and advocating and telling people and encouraging them, doing the marketing to get people to use that platform. Now, this starts to become a great source of input for product management, because these people are, if they're doing their job correctly, they're constantly talking with the customers, the developers. They're gathering feedback about what would be useful and what works well. So they start to become part of how you improve the product as well. Hence the advocacy. They're advocating for the customer. So as I'll get into next, that role often expands into multiple people and a whole team. But another aspect of that is that you start to think about what the branding, what the name of the platform is, right? And again, I like to raise this because for more technical people, this kind of is dismissed as like just some marketing stuff that doesn't matter. But I've seen it over and over again become very important to come up with something as simple as a name for what this platform is, right? And you can see some examples of this across 4 different organizations. They come up with not only a name for the platform, but they come up with a name for the methodology it supports, that kind of agile methodology, that platform as a product. And they start to document in the books. I think if I have that one of those books actually back here from Duke Energy, a big energy provider. But it becomes important to document what that culture is, make a handbook of it. And you can see that from Mercedes and BT, British Telco here, and other organizations. And really that effort, and I'm spending a lot of time on it because a lot of people neglect it and they don't end up doing it. But that becomes very important for how organizations are successful at that. And it's something to start thinking about right away, how you're building that out. And then to that point, if you want a kind of quick take on how one organization, JP Morgan Chase, has been doing all of this platform as a product thinking over the years. They've been doing this for many, many years. There's a great, from one of our past conferences, DevOps Loop, just a couple of months ago, there's a great presentation from Nadi here at JP Morgan Chase, who actually heads up. He helped build out the platform as a product, the platform that they had. And now he heads up that advocacy team that I think has maybe, if I remember last, like 4 or 6 people, depending on how his hiring has been going. And they support globally for I lose track of how many developers and related people JP Morgan Chase has, big global bank, but they've got something in the order of 20,000 or so, maybe 15,000, 20,000 developers and people working on apps. So they actually have, at that scale, they've got a couple of platforms, not just one, but they have it branded as their Gaia platforms. Again, there's a brand name that they have there. And they have advocates that are working on that. They follow this platform as a product mentality. And you can see for their Kubernetes platform, they actually have a lot of applications running on there. They've had a lot of success with this approach. And, in addition to and they also run, I mentioned the Tanzu application service. They're also using that type of platform if you want to kind of learn the different kind of modes of operating that those 2 platforms we help people out with, what they support, and the different reasons that you would use either one. But if you want to see that brief talk, you can see how they've kind of cataloged their learnings and the practices they follow when it comes to doing platform as a product. And I've just kind of scratched the surface a little bit of what they do there. But it's a great reference for how one large organization has been successful in applying this approach, getting beyond that blinking cursor that Kubernetes and other things will offer you. So with that, not always, but I frequently like to wait to introducing myself to the end. Hopefully, because before you kind of know someone, if they introduce themselves, you're kind of like, I'm not sure why I'm interested. They look like a lovely person. But if you're interested in these kind of concepts that I've gone over, this is just one aspect, the kind of infrastructure part of it. But I'm lucky that I spend a lot of time, as hopefully you can tell, studying how large organizations are getting better at software, changing their capabilities to not only build that software, but also run and manage it, that whole stack needed to support measuring the mayonnaise, to use that one example. And I document those every now and then, hopefully annually, but sometimes I get distracted. And some little booklets that kind of pull together the best practices I've been seeing. And there's a lot of podcasts and videos and things like that I do to kind of really just help get that knowledge out, to advocate for this process and culture of how things are going. And then finally, before we open it up for some Q&A, if you're really interested in exploring more, we have our VMware Explorer conference coming up pretty soon here. It used to be called VMworld, which, you have no doubt heard of if you're interested in infrastructure stuff. But as VMware has expanded into new areas, into supporting that application, cycle, supporting application developers and that whole stack underneath, we've expanded out what the conference does. And there's a lot of great talks that we have at Explore. There's an EU version, and we also have APJ versions that will be running throughout the year as well. But definitely, if you just search around for VMware Explorer, you can browse the content catalog. And I've got a little bit more information on my own website there if you want to check it out as well and kind of come attend it. I've got a couple of talks that I'm giving there, which I think I've prepared for enough. I should go check and make sure. But it'll be a great conference with lots of good content to check out. So with that, if there's any questions that the audience has, we've got a little bit of time to go over that. And I'm happy to answer anything I'm capable of answering, so to speak. And thanks for listening in. It was great to see what y'all's input was during the polls, and it'll be interesting to see what people's questions are.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We got a few questions from the audience. Is measuring usage by cluster really the correct way of measure?
Well, questions about metrics are always great, and there should be I forget the name of the law, but there's some principle that whenever there's a news headline that ends in a question, the answer is always no, which is a fun little game to play with yourself when you're reading the news. And I think yes, I think the intent behind the question, at least what I would assume, is it's not like the only best way of measuring Kubernetes usage. Now, I think it is a way, and maybe the best way we have at the moment, to kind of measure the amount of Kubernetes that you have, right? And really, it just depends what it is you're talking about. Like from my perspective, right, I'm always interested in applications. So I would rate this, as you can kind of imagine, I would rate the success of running Kubernetes based on the outcomes that the organization is achieving, right? So like I was kind of saying, you could have hundreds of Kubernetes clusters running, but like if it's not really helping your organization, like who cares? Like it doesn't really matter that much. So now that's a bit of a tricky way to kind of answer that question. But I think at the moment, like, you could measure containers you're supporting, you could measure kind of raw compute and storage that you're using, all sorts of metrics like that. But I think clusters has kind of emerged as like, if you want like a quick and easy metric to kind of gauge how much Kubernetes you have, I think it's a pretty good metric. But yeah, I mean, certainly if you want to measure by containers or pods or kind of like footprint based on resources that you're using, that's something. But I think clusters is probably the easiest way and the easiest, most meaningful way of doing a measurement. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what emerges over time.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We got another question. It's about the installation of VMware Tanzu with NSXT. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I unfortunately don't know enough details about that to answer it here, but we can find someone who is much wiser than I am in these matters. I'm much more of a process person.
I think it's better to like find someone like the person who are taking care of your accounts, like account manager or those professional engineer that's taking care of your accounts.
Absolutely.
I think they are very capable.
So hopefully we can find that person for you if you're interested and hook you up with them.
Yeah, let us know if you need any further assistance.
All right.
So
well, I don't see any more questions. So
yeah. So you have any more things to add? We have a little bit of time.
No, I think I surprised myself in slowing myself down or making sure I didn't talk too much. Usually I have a lot more to add. But yeah, I mean, I think, kind of in closing, I think like I was going over, there's a lot of great stuff if you are part of an organization that's supporting running and doing your own software. I think we're finally at a point where it's it's possible to put that strategy in place, right? There's not a lot of unanswered questions about how to do it. There's people like JP Morgan Chase. There's many other examples of people who have, they've done the learning for you, so to speak. And so as you're planning and thinking out how to do it, you don't have to go through that painful learning process on your own. And we're always happy to, I'm always happy to share experiences that other people have had, and all of my colleagues are happy to help you plan that out and run it. So good luck with that. It should be a fun time in the next year and the years after that, building out your platforms.
Okay, then thank you very much, Michael, for your sharing today. And thank you very much for everyone for participating in this webinar. So we will share the recording link with you shortly.
Everyone have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.